Beginning. And we just started 2020, 5 days ago. Amen. The Israelites were promised a new beginning in a new land. They had just arrived as close as they would get to the promised land while in the wilderness. And Moses took one of the leaders of each tribe, 12 men, and sent them into the promised land to scout the land and to bring back word as to what kind of land it was, if it was a prosperous land, who were the people living in Canaan at the time. And so the 12 men go out into the land and come back. 10 of the 12 came back with very bad news. 10 of the 12 said, there are giants in the land. We can't take them. We can't overtake them. They brought fruit to show that the land was fruitful. They brought some of the produce from the land. But they kept saying, we can't go in there. Caleb, on the other hand, and Joshua believed that they could go in there. That they could take them. Because it was promised to them by God. And in the land at the time, you had the Amalekites, you had the Hittites, you had the Jebusites, you had the Amorites in the mountains, the Canaanites by the sea and by the bank of the Jordan. And then you had those giants that they called, those people they called giants that were descendants of Anak and the Philistines. And so they bring back all this land, but Caleb says in Numbers 13:30, he says, let us go up at once and take possession, for we are able to overcome it. Caleb was sure that they were going to be able to overcome this land because it was promised to them by God. On the other hand, the other 10 were not in accord. Only Moses and only Caleb and Joshua were in accord that they could take the land. The situation looked dire because these men even tried or wanted to stone Caleb and Joshua because they were saying we could go in there. They did not trust the words of God. They did not trust the promise that God had made to them. They did not trust themselves. And this is the history of the Israelites. The reason they spent 40 years in the wilderness was because of their disobedience and because of their unfaithfulness. And so God is here saying to them, okay, you spent 40 years trying to get here. Now you get here and you're afraid to go in there. That's not what I promised you. That's not what I want from you. And we are, as Christians, sometimes God speaks to us and we don't want to do what God is telling us. I can tell you because when I went to seminary, it was because God said, you have no choice. For 3 years, I fought off going to seminary. For 3 years, I said, I'm not going. I don't want to study anymore. I'm too old. God had other plans. And so God sent 2 people to the church, Holy Gospel, that I was going to. And those 2 people were the ones that God used instrumentally and quickly to get me into the seminary to study. I really didn't want to do that. But that was not God's plan. And so these people show up at the church one day and they said, when we're talking, I always introduced myself to people in the church when they came in new. And that was their first day there. And they told me that they were professors on Aya College. And I told them, I feel like I need to go to seminary. For the last 3 years, I've been just putting it off. I just don't want to do that. And so one of them says, give me your phone number. And within 2 months, I was registered. Wow. I was taking 5 classes. And the Alliance was paying half my tuition. God worked all that out. Because if I had a choice, I would never have gone to seminary. But let's go into Numbers 14, and let's read the first 10 verses, because this is a very interesting time for the Jews, because they finally are ready to leave the wilderness and to go into this land, and they're not very amenable to do that. Their thoughts are, let's go back to Egypt where we belong, where we were at. Let's become slaves again. We don't want to go into the land because we didn't come here to die. Here's what verses 1 through 14 says. So all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried, and the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron, and the whole congregation said to them, if only we had died in the land of Egypt, or if only we had died in this wilderness. Why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Will it not be better for us to return to Egypt? So they said to one another, let us select a leader and return to Egypt. Then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the children of Israel. But Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes. And they spoke to all the congregation of the children of Israel, saying, the land we passed through to spy out is an exceedingly good land. If the Lord delights in us, then he will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. And all the congregation said to stone them with stones. Now the glory of the Lord appeared in the tabernacle of meeting before all the children of Israel. My first point is that fear sometimes clouds our judgment. Fear clouds our judgment. These people were so fearful that it was clouding their judgment. It was clouding their belief. It was clouding their faith. It was clouding what God has promised for them to do. And, many times in the past, God has sent people to do certain things, and they didn't obey it exactly how God planned it, and they suffer for it. So, for example, when Saul went out to destroy the people of the land, God told them, kill everything. Don't bring anything back. Just kill everyone, children, everything. Do not bring anything back. They brought a whole lot of stuff back. And that's how Saul started to lose his kingdom, because of disobedience to what God had commanded them. And sometimes we as Christians are commanded to do certain things, and we disobey. For example, we have all been commanded to bring the gospel to everyone. Well, how many times do we speak to people about the gospel? Many of us don't. Many of us are afraid to bring the gospel to people because of the times that we live in. And I understand we live in difficult times where people don't want to hear it, where people might get upset. But if we really believe that God is with us, then we will bring that message to them. Verses 1 and 2 says, so all the congregation lifted up their voices and cried. And the people wept that night. And all the children of Israel complained against Moses and Aaron. The whole congregation said to them, if only we had died in the land of Egypt, if only we had died in the wilderness. Because of their fears, they wept and cried. If you're willing to die in the wilderness, can't you be willing to die for God in the promised land if that's what it took? They're saying they'd rather die than go into the land. But if you're so afraid of being killed in this land, why are you afraid? You're saying you'd rather die. They wept and rather die. So if you would rather die, wouldn't you rather die doing what God sent you to do? God sent them to go into the promised land to take the land. But they'd rather die away from that land because they're afraid to die in the land. And that makes no sense. If you're willing to die, you're willing to die for God. And so they found themselves so fearful that they could not see what was right in front of them. And what was right in front of them? The promised land. This is a land that was promised to them back from Abraham, from the days of Abraham. It was promised to them. They finally get close to it, and now they're afraid to go in. And to believe that you'll be better off as a slave in Egypt, to believe that you want to get someone to lead you back to where you came from, where God got you out from, where God had to send 10 different plagues in order to get you out of there, and now that's what you want to go back to? What that shows is that not only didn't they trust God, they were not in line with God. And these are his people. These are the people that God put into place to be his. And so they were afraid. They would rather die in the wilderness than go in there and do what God is telling them to do. Now, one thing they could have done was, when the guys came back saying that we couldn't do that, they could have asked Moses to speak to God. Moses did it before. They could have said to Moses, why don't you speak to God and see what he wants from us? See how he wants us to go into the land. Right? Put it in prayer. They didn't do that. They were just afraid. And there's nothing worse than fear. And the enemy has a way of putting fears in our hearts, in our soul, in our minds, to keep us from doing the godly things. People at work fear bringing the gospel to a co-worker because that co-worker could go to the boss and the boss might fire you. That's the fear that we face. But that is the enemy speaking to us in our ears, trying to tell us not to do what God is telling us to do. And we can't be fearful when we're doing the things of God. Deuteronomy 1:45 says, Then you returned and wept before the Lord, but the Lord would not listen to your voice nor give ear to you. That's what happens when you disobey God. You can cry all you want, but if you're not doing what he wants you to do, he's not going to listen to you. He's not going to hear what you have to say. God doesn't want to hear anything but, I am doing your will, Lord. That's all he wants to hear. I am doing your will. I want to do what pleases you. And so, they didn't even think to ask God for direction, because they were so intent on going back, because they were so fearful, that Satan already had gotten into their heads. Here's what Numbers 14:3 says, Why has the Lord brought us to this land to fall by the sword, that our wives and children should become victims? Will it not be better for us to return to Egypt? Well, that's not what God promised you. God didn't promise you death in the promised land. God promised you a land rich and a land that flows with milk and honey. That's what God promised you. Unfortunately, again, when you're scared to do something, no one can get you to do it. And sometimes we get so scared of different things that we neglect to move forward because of fear. So for example, let's say, God forbid, that a person has a tumor. And the doctor tells him, if we don't remove it now, you will die from it. But the person is so scared of the surgery that they don't get the tumor removed, and then they die from it. What was worse? You were so scared that you could die of the surgery that you would rather die. I've known people that have died because they refused to take chemo that could save their lives because they're afraid of the effects of it. My wife and I know a 29-year-old. They gave him a 70% chance of survival. 70%. But he started the chemo treatment, and the chemo treatment was so bad that he would rather die. And he did. He stopped the chemo and he died. If you have a 70% chance of survival, that means that if you take the chemo the way it's supposed to be, you should be able to survive it. But he was scared. He was afraid of what the effects were in his body and what he had to go through. Now, we also know a person that went into the hospital and told the doctors, do whatever you want to me. And that person is walking around very healthy today.
Amen.
Because he was not afraid. the fear that the Israelites have into going into this promised land is preventing them from enjoying the fruitfulness of the land. It's preventing them from enjoying the land that they got promised. And so we need to trust God, because if we trust and we believe that God is in control, then there's no reason for us to doubt what God has promised to us. Here's my second point. Trusting God without fear. Trusting God without fear. Numbers 14:4 says, so they said to one another, let us select a leader and return to Egypt. Again, they believed the 10 men that came back telling them that they couldn't go in there. But they neglected to believe the guy that was telling them, yeah, we could go in there. Numbers 14:5-6 says, then Moses and Aaron fell on their faces before all the assembly of the congregation of the children of Israel. By Joshua the son of Nun and Caleb the son of Jephunneh, who were among those who had spied out the land, tore their clothes. If you read the Old Testament, every time that the Israelites wanted to come back to God, or wanted God to forgive them, what was the first thing they did? They tore their clothes and got into sackcloth. It was a way of them telling God, I repent of my sins. And in this, to me, is Caleb and Joshua are repenting, not for themselves, but for the rest of them. It's like they're asking God, forgive them. Forgive them because they don't know what they're saying. Forgive them because they don't know what's going on. As a result of all of this, what happened to the Israelites was that no one over the age of 20 was able to get into the promised land. That was God's punishment. If you're over 20, you will never get into the promised land. Now, the number of the Israelites at this time was estimated anywhere between 1.5 to 2.4 million people. A little over 600,000 of them were supposed to be soldiers, or warriors as they call it. But all of them were supposed to enter the land at one point. In the end, they didn't because of their disobedience. Numbers 14:30 says, except for Caleb the son of Jephunneh and Joshua the son of Nun, you shall by no means enter the land which I swore I would make you dwell in. Deuteronomy 1:39 says, moreover, your little ones and your children, who you say will be victims, who today have no knowledge of good and evil, they shall go in there, to them I will give it, and they shall possess it. So God is taking their own words, victims, right? He said, that's what they said, that their wives and their children will be victims. He says, okay, so the victims are the ones that are going to go into the promised land now. You are not going to be able to go in. Your children, who you call victims today, are the ones that I'm going to give the land to. And only Joshua and Caleb were allowed to go into that promised land with the children. Even Moses was not allowed to go into the promised land. God who has called you to be something special, who has called you to perform certain tasks, who has given you certain gifts, he expects each and every one of us to take all those gifts, the tasks that he assigns to us, and expects us to do that. And so as we go into the 2020 year now, or 5 days in now, we should be thinking about, what are the gifts that I have that God has given me that I have not used? What tasks has God put in my heart that I have neglected to do? What special thing does God want me to do this year that I have not done? We have to start looking into the future and not in the past. The Israelites were living in the past and not looking at the future that was right in front of them. We have a future right in front of us that God has planned completely out for us. We just have to obey, be faithful, and trust Him. Now, Let me close with this. Caleb and Joshua told the people to trust God, to trust Him. In Numbers 4, 8 and 9, he says, if the Lord delights in us, then He will bring us into this land and give it to us, a land which flows with milk and honey. Only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them, and the Lord is with us. Do not fear them. Let me break this down a little bit. The first part says, if the Lord delights in us, then He will bring us into this land and give it to us. That was the promise. And the Lord delighted in giving them the land, but they had to have the courage to go into the land. And at this point, they did not have the courage to go into the land. And so God had to make other plans. And the other plans were, none of you over 20 who is afraid to go into the land is going to go in there. I'll take your children and I'll give them the strength and the courage from a young age so that when they get old enough to go in there, they can go into the land and take it over. They will have the courage that you don't have. Second part, he says, only do not rebel against the Lord, nor fear the people of the land, for they are our bread. Their protection has departed from them. Their protection had departed from them. God always took care of the people when the Israelites believed Him, right? How many times did God go before them and destroy nations so that they can walk in there without having to fight? How many times have we read stories of God going before them and wiping out all the people that wanted to harm them so that they could go in there? But they forgot. They were so scared they forgot what God had done before. It's like, what have you done for me lately? Right? They were in the wilderness for 40 years. They were fed for 40 years. Their shoes never wore out in the wilderness for 40 years. And they still complained. As we go into 2020, let us not complain about anything in our lives. In all things, let's give thanks to God, whether we're going through some good stuff or whether we're going through some bad stuff. Let's always thank God for His goodness. Amen. Because the things that we go through in life, if we have God on our side, we can get through it. If we have a wall in front of us, we can get through that wall. We can tear down that wall because God is with us. So as we go into 2020, let's not remember some of the hardships that we went through in 2019. But remember that we can go forward with a God that's willing, ready, and able to get us to where He wants us to get. He is faithful, even when we're not faithful. When we don't trust Him, it's because we do not have any in us, not because He's failing to bring to us the Word. The last part of this says, do not fear them. In other words, do not fear the people of that land. There's no reason for us to have feared the people of that land. Because the people of that land were already set up by God to be destroyed. Listen to what He says a little bit back. He says, only do not rebel against the word, nor fear the people of the land. They are our bread. Everything in the land was set up for the Israelites to take over. Everything. All they had to do was go in there. But they were fearful. They were fearful. As we enter the new year, and we are, like I said, 5 days in, whatever happens in our lives, let's remember that it's because God is allowing it to happen. And God has a plan. Because of their lack of trust, because of their lack of faith, because of their disobedience, they were not allowed to enter the promised land. Anyone over 20? We cannot be disobedient to God and not allow his blessings to come upon us. We cannot be unfaithful to God so the anointing that we have, we could lose it in a minute. We cannot go forward without God in our lives, guiding our lives, because things are going to go wrong. And it is time for us to understand that it's God that keeps us on the straight and narrow. Again, only Caleb and Joshua were allowed to go into the promised land because they were the only two that were willing to go in there and fight these people if they had to take the land. They knew what the promise was. They knew they had to be obedient. And if you keep reading the history of Caleb, the Bible says that at the age of 85, Caleb was as strong as he was during this time. When he was 85 years old, God had kept him with the same strength that he had when he was young. Because he was faithful to the end. Because he obeyed God no matter what happened. Sometimes we don't have the patience to wait on God. Sometimes we don't have the patience to wait until God moves the pieces that he needs to move to give us what he wants to give us. And sometimes because we don't have the patience, we do some things that we shouldn't be doing. Sometimes I call them stupid stuff that we're not supposed to be doing. And then we have to live with the consequences. How patient are we that God is going to give us what he promises to us? The Israelites had to wait a long time to get to the promised land. But we need to be patient because God has a plan for us. We just need to see it through. How patient are we that God is going to deliver us to what he promises to us? One of the promises that God has made to us is that we are going to be in the kingdom of heaven.
Amen.
And I want to be very patient before I get there. I don't want my time to come anytime soon. But if it is his will, then I'm ready. And that is the best part. We need to be ready. We need to be ready when that decision comes. We need to be ready when God calls us. We need to be ready to perform the duties and responsibilities that he has given us. We need to be ready to live by the commands that he has given us. We need to be ready to go out and perform the commands that he has given us. It's all about trust and faith in God, who always delivers what he promises. God will always deliver what he promises. It's up to us to be obedient to the end. Let's pray.